All right, people, welcome to another edition of the New Breed Show, the world's best metal show, talking about everything brutal, new death, hard slam, grind, thrashcore, metal. I am one half of your hosting duo, Jay Horsecow. With me, I have my partner in crime, the notorious TIM, Tim Anderson Jr. How you doing, Tim?
Great.
Fantastic. And our special guest this episode, the man behind the infamous Tattoo the Earth tour, author of the book Caravan of Pain, the true story of the Tattoo the Earth tour, Mr. Scott Alderman. Scott, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here with you guys and to talk about the tour and the book.
We are stoked to have you. So I think, first off, we'll start off by saying, you think about the idea of combining tattooing and extreme music, right? In 2022, that's kind of like, well, yeah, I guess that kind of makes sense because, like, my dentist has a tattooed hand at this point. But in 2000, like, you were literally blazing a trail that no one had ever even remotely gone down before.
Yeah, it was really underground back then. And it's kind of because it wasn't that long ago and it's so prevalent now. It's hard to believe it. But the night that I sort of had the vision for the tour, I bought all these magazines at a newsstand in Boston and Cambridge, and just going through magazines to find ads of people with tattoos, I couldn't find any. There weren't many celebrities. If you look at the picture of the Dream Team from 2000, the basketball team, none of them have tattoos. So tattooing was illegal in a couple of states.
Wow.
In Massachusetts, my home state, and had just become legalized in New York. So it was pretty underground. You didn't see Olympic athletes with sleeves, and you didn't see pop stars. You just didn't see that. It was all wrestlers and metalheads and bikers and miscreants. It wasn't mainstream by any stretch of the imagination.
You're right. And you actually called it out in your book. The first athlete I can think of that recognizing that he had a lot of tattoos was Allen Iverson, which is funnily enough from our local area, Philadelphia 76ers. He was the first guy where, and Tim, wasn't there some controversy where they airbrushed out his tattoos on the cover of
That's right.
NBA Live or something? It was him or somebody.
I believe so.
Yeah. And it created like a big kerfluffle. But so Scott, you talked about where the idea came from, and you talk about it in the book. It was almost like an epiphany / fever dream when you were getting a tattoo, right?
Yeah, no, it was pretty fucked up. It was a vision. And the thing is, after a while, I stopped talking about it that way because people started looking at me like nuts, like I was nuts. But I mean, he was tattooing me and I was talking and I just said, tattoo the earth, and just started riffing on it. And literally from that moment, that's why I can pinpoint the time and the day. Like anytime something profound happens, you can usually pinpoint the time like that. I know the time and date it happened. It's like I'm still sitting there. And I just started riffing on it. And from that moment forward, I thought of nothing else and did nothing else but try to get the thing launched. So it was a fever, whatever it was, it started at that time and I just would not let go of it. So, but again, I sort of kept that to myself for the most part because people were starting to look at me like I was crazy until it happened.
Right.
Then I'll break it out.
And that was the other interesting part of the book. You not only do you talk about the tour, but you talk about all the work you put in to actually get this thing going and off the ground. And it literally was, you did the whole damn thing yourself. I mean, there were people in the book that floated in and out. There was a representative A&R guy. There was a tattoo artist here and there. But for the most part, Scott, you put on the whole thing yourself.
Yeah, I was driving the whole thing until I could get a team. And that's when you start new projects. If you stop it, it stops. If I take a day off, the thing is dead. It has no momentum. No one else is doing it. So that part of it, the stress of that, of just knowing that if I stopped, there was no one else picking up the slack, that sort of got to me over while I was working on it. And I realized that this is just me. I need to just make this happen, will it to happen.
You actually have a quote later in the book that I've actually used at work. I do IT stuff, and you have a quote where you said, unless you are willing to throw 100% of yourself into a startup, you have no business doing it.
Yeah.
And I've said that to, I do IT work, and there's always these guys who are like, hey, maybe we should go out and be our own consultants. And I look at them like, are you high?
Yeah.
Like, no, like I'm not ready to just go kind of nuts. And it's not like you were 22 with delusions of grandeur. You were like in your mid 30s at that point, right?
I was
like
almost 40.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I was almost 40. And I was just like, yeah, exactly. But it started as a fever dream and felt like that, and it was written like that too.
Mm,
Because I mean that's what it, but that's going back to just the startup thing. But I just really believe that, and anybody who told me that it wasn't going to work, it just made me stronger.
right, right.
I had
It
no
becomes a
doubt.
big
I could close my eyes. I don't give a fuck what you say. I don't care about your rules. It didn't matter. And the people who succeed in those types of ventures are the people who act that way.
Yep.
But to act that way, you got to be an asshole a good chunk of the time, and you forsake a lot in doing. You
right.
pay a price for it. Many people get martyred. So it's a double-edged sword. But I knew it that there could never be a moment where someone could see me waver. They always had
Yep.
to see right in my eye. And I have ideas for new things, and I have an idea that I think is even better than Tattoo of the Year. I'm not willing to do what it takes to do it. I don't want
Right.
to go on the road. I don't want to work with agents. I don't want, I have a list of things I just don't want to do. It's like, it's not,
Right.
So,
I'm done.
so you're saying it got to the point where so many people were doubting you that you were like, I have to prove these fucking people are wrong.
Absolutely. I met with a
Okay.
marketing guy, and he's like, I get 100 ideas like this a year, and one of them happened, and I don't think yours is the one. And I'm like, you just fucking watch, man. And that's
Right.
what, in the book, it really becomes almost comical, because I'm like, this effort stops. This effort doesn't work. This effort doesn't work. I get busted. I get sick. I just all these obstacles put in my way. I just didn't care. I was not going to stop until I could get to that finish line.
Right. I mean, you talked about early on, you met with, I think it was like Irving Azoff, and you meet with
Yeah.
all these, they flew you out to California, and you're meeting with all these power players. And it's
Yeah.
kind of like the dry handy, like, yeah, we kind of think it'll work. And the more that story went on, the more you can, in the book, you talk about, you develop a resolve to say, well, fuck you. I'm going to do this. I'm going to
Yeah.
do this, and it's going to work. And you're either going to be with me, or you're going to be in the way.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's how I felt. And, but that didn't know, but I also had a sense that I didn't know what the fuck I was talking about it many times during this, and that I was out of my league, and that I wasn't completely bananas. I had a sense of what, and I also had a sense of what it was like being an outsider. I wasn't in the music business anymore. I hadn't been in the music business for years, and I wasn't in the tattoo industry. So you're coming in as an outsider, and you want some of their commodity. I want your
Mm,
bands. So you're coming in and asking for the gold right away. And that's where they let everybody nip around the edges, but the music business is controlled by a very small group of people, a very, very small group of people.
right.
And I didn't understand how small it was until I got deeper into it. And every time I thought I was close, it's like a car view, a side view mirror. Objects seem closer than they appear. That's what this was like. I always thought I was right there, and then in retrospect, I'm like, Jesus, I wasn't even close, man.
Right.
So you go into I didn't know, I hadn't done this before. So I had no sort of, benchmarks to go by.
And you pick two unique industries, which which from the outside we can all look at and say, yeah, there's a little bit of ego that goes in those industries. You have touring musicians, artists, right? They have their own stories, right? Their own demons. And then you picked big name tattoo artists who,
Yeah.
again, they're artists. All artists are the same. They can be a little weird. They can be a little egomaniacal. You talk
Yeah.
about some of the stuff in the book, and you really just slap these two things together and said, all right, bitches, we're going on the road. Let's party.
Yeah.
And I mean, kind of like, it's kind of wild. Tim, I don't know if I shared it with you, you got a chance to look at it, but like you talked early on, Scott, some of the bands that you were talking to that kind of fell by the wayside, like Cypress Hill,
Yeah.
Red Hot Chili Peppers. When what's his name brought that up, I was like, that would have been interesting
Yeah.
look, like, Chili Peppers in that, Orgy, Kid Rock.
Yeah.
But in hindsight and reading the book and remember what I remember at the time, because for our Lowe's listeners, you have to have heard me mention this. I was at the Giant Stadium show where Metallica headlined, and Slipknot seemed to be, in hindsight, the linchpin, Scott. Like, that really seemed to be the band that made the
Yeah.
whole thing go.
That was the whole thing. And that's what, from the beginning, I knew that I had to find that one thing, that band, that person, that, who would let the thing, who ignite it. And they were the ones that, once we got them, everything fell into place. Literally, I had a website that was getting 10 visitors a day. from me handing out cards and stuff to having 150,000 once
Wow.
it hit that Slipknot was going to be out. They had just gone platinum.
Yeah, I mean, and you hit.
I had a guy in
at the right
Ohio.
time.
I had a guy in Ohio who was hosting that site, Tattoo the Earth, and he was doing hosting as a side thing. He was registering domains. This is 22 years ago. Slipknot got announced for Tattoo the Earth. Literally, his server blew off the wall. He invested in a whole business that he's still in today because of Tattoo the Earth, because we had so many. I don't even know what happened.
That's
And they're all
awesome.
pissed off. When a date's going to be announced.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
So
And I
this
mean,
is when the self-titled went platinum.
Yeah, the first
Yeah,
album went
so-
platinum.
Okay.
Scott got them at the absolute perfect time because they came off Ozfest where
Yeah.
they exploded on that second stage. Nobody expected that, right?
Yeah.
And I remembered seeing them in Jersey in the Birch Hill, and it was jam packed. And then they did Tattoo the Earth, and then the next album comes out, and they're playing arenas.
Yeah.
So he literally grabbed them right as they were ascending,
Yes.
and right out there.
And pissed off a lot of people.
Oh, well, that's the other thing that I gotta say it. Sharon Osbourne does not look good in this story. She does not look good. So I mean, Tim hasn't read it, but Tim Scott talks about in the book how Ozfest at this point was 3 years in, right? It was a big touring thing. You had Warped Tour. Scott comes along and Sharon freaks out. So she goes to Clear Channel and Scott lost all the venues. We're going to talk about the venue selection in a minute. Like you were literally, Scott, like you literally did like a punk DIY roving festival tour, like trying to find venues and stuff. That's kind of wild.
Yeah, to tattoo in. And we went into it. See, the Warped Tour did that by design. We weren't doing that by design. We didn't want to do that,
Right.
And that's what it ended up being. But I'll say this about Sharon Osbourne, and I never met the woman, right? Is that, we came in and mucked up the works as outsiders. Now, I've been in businesses in my life that when people did that to me, I did not take it lightly and did everything in my power. So I don't begrudge her doing that. We really, Steve Richards, Slipknot's manager, had lunch with her and shook her hand and said, we'll headline the second stage. And then we stole them. And then all the hot bands at the time, new baby bands that wanted to be near Slipknot left Ozfest because of Slipknot. So she was pissed. And she had every right to be.
Right.
And Kevin Lyman was too. They're like, well, geez, what are you doing here? So I get it, but it didn't mean that it didn't make it really freaking hard. We had a tour that was 38 shows. And we ended up with like 18 that were all rodeos and parking lots and horse racetracks.
Yeah, unreal. I and to your point, I get it, right? I think competition is good for everybody because it forces you to get on your A game. And at that point, Ozfest was a established touring summer festival, like the best of new metal. So I do kind of think she was being kind of dickish, but I get it. But I mean, like you said, you ended up in venues like horse rodeos, right?
Yeah.
The Texas shows. You ended up in places where you literally were building the venue to play the show at
from scratch.
The one that jumped out at me is the Tim. They played a show in Wisconsin in a sealed golf dome. Wasn't it sealed?
It was in Chicago, the World Golf Dome, a pressurized golf dome, like a driving range. Like one of those big bubbles. And you had to, and when we did the load in, it had a long corridor. You had to fill the corridor with equipment and then wait like 5 minutes for everything to repressurize again before you could open the other door. It might deflate. So it took forever to load the stuff in. And actually, fans have been contacting me on social media saying, there was only one door in and out of that place. I'm like, oh my God, I'm glad I didn't know that at the time. But it was 100 degrees. Both stages were playing at the same time under a
dome, so the acoustics had to be tough. Yeah,
it was horrible. The ninth level of hell, man.
I mean, you had a show at a rodeo. You had a show at a racetrack where you actually talked about, Tim. They talked about having to use the same showers the jockeys use, where like the shower head is like 3.5 feet off the ground. Like,
hit me in the chest. I'm gonna tell you, man. I've been in gross places. That's about as gross, that locker room. It's like at the end of the racing season, all the jockeys just left and no one cleaned anything up. And I was like, oh my God, well, just let me go home. I had my moment, my first show moment. Let me just go home. And,
Isn't that how you get MRSA nowadays?
Yeah, right.
What's that?
That's how you
Isn't that
get
how you get
MRSA.
MRSA nowadays?
Yeah, exactly.
But
Exactly.
with all that said, Scott, I mean, you put together a hell of a tour. When you look at the band lineup, I mean, it was the Workhorse Movement and Hatebreed and Full Devil Jacket and Nothing Face and Famous and 1 Minute Silence and Nashville Pussy. And on the main stage, you have Slipknot, Slayer, Sepultura with Derek Green, Seven Dust. Like it was a hell of a lineup. Like it really was.
We have, before we go anywhere, now the band Famous, please tell us who that is, because I cannot figure out to this day who was in that band.
It was a guy, Lauren Baquette, and this guy, Sean E. DeMott, who's actually now a filmmaker. He makes horror films with Daryl Bozeman. I think he was the bass player. You know, I met, when I was trying to get this off the ground, I was talking to anybody at any time. And I met this guy named Lauren, who was in a band called Drown, and who had a little bit of a moment out on the West Coast. And he really helped me get this off the ground. I didn't know what the hell I was doing, man. I was 40 years old. My partner was 10 years older. He was running blues festivals and oldies shows. So he really hit me to, like, he's the one who said, it'd be great if you got the Chili Peppers or a band like that, but you want a young, hot, hard band that hasn't made its name yet, that's dangerous, that's right. And so he's the one who pointed us to Slipknot. Okay. And when we got them, his payoff was to open up the main stage, his band.
You talked about it in the book.
Record deal, they didn't go anywhere. Our agent wanted to kill me, but it was like that was his payoff for doing it. He got to open up the main stage of the show.
You called the audience in the book the vomiting demographic, and I was like, yeah, that's probably about as apt a nickname as you could give. And I mean, there's some interesting stories behind some of the other bands, right? So Soulfly was signed up. And then they actually went back to Sharon and headline. I think they did headline the second stage.
Yeah, they might have. They might have. Yeah.
Coal Chamber was on and then bailed. And
a week
Tim,
before.
Get this: there were people who wanted refunds because Coal Chamber wasn't on the show. Like I would have been like, "Are you kidding me?" If anybody listening to the show, watching the show, if you're old enough, if you actually requested a refund because Coal Chamber wasn't attached to the earth, please find the show. We want to bring you on. We want to talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about just that band not being there, but then the rest of the lineup, it's like, are you kidding me right now?
Right. Seriously? I'm in.
We were supposed to have Puya too.
Yeah.
We thought they were going to show up the first. We didn't know who was going to show. And I say that to people, and I say, I don't know who was going to show up the first show. I didn't know. That's not an exaggeration. That's not hyperbole, man. We were like, okay, Puya's not here. Spineshank's here. You know, it's like it was pretty crazy.
Yeah, you talked about the book. Spineshank showed up by surprise, and you were like, "Well, I guess we'll put him on some shows, right?"
Yeah, we got a spot.
The other thing that makes this, I mean, stand out in my mind now that I look at it like holistically, that not only the semblance of bands, and then you had the shuffle to find venues, but the routing and the amount of driving. Like you guys started in Portland, Oregon, and Stone Temple Pilots was on the show. Then you ended up in Lawrence, Kansas.
Yeah.
And then it was New York City.
Yeah.
So Tim, imagine that drive.
I don't even like driving to work, and that would, yeah.
Yeah. No, I was, frankly, I didn't know about it then, but I really should have had like that propofol drip they gave Michael Jackson, where I just sort of go out. They sort of like take me down for 30 hours until we get to Kansas. But it was pretty terrible.
That is totally
the
wild.
Night after the first show, after like the stress of all of it and the excitement, and then showering in the jockey shower, and then getting on a bus. I woke up the next morning and I had a dime-sized gray patch in my beard, my stubble. I turned gray overnight.
Wow.
Yeah.
All the stress and
the stress and everything. I just woke up. My wife's like, "Look, what happened to you? What is that?" You know. Yeah.
Oh, was your wife on the tour with you?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's cool.
Yeah, she was on the tour with me, which is a good thing, because when I'm on the road without accompaniment, I'm in big trouble.
Yeah.
Which happens at the end of the book. I go out on the road without her, and I end up just completely fucking up.
But even with her, right? Like you talk about, there was the venue in, what was it, Iowa or Ohio, that No More Concerts. There was the Massachusetts venue where they were driving around trying to find where all the cursing was coming from so they could shut down. Tim, the people in town thought it was a party. So they were driving around trying to find where the party was so they can get it shut down.
Oh my God. And you walk in and you see 9
in
people
Revere,
in
Massachusetts.
yeah. You see 9 people in jumpsuits and masks.
Yeah.
You're like, what?
And the thing is, I say in a couple of the spots, they would be like, you have to talk to the bands about the cursing on the stage. And I'm like, are you fucking crazy? Like, even if I was going to do it, I would never do it. If I did, it would just set them off.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is as good as it's going to get. Just relax. It'll be over in a couple of hours. And because it was a long show, you're talking about, look at the bands on this show. It's nonstop pounding music for 10 hours.
Right. And if you say, don't say motherfucker, somebody's going to get up on stage and say, oh, these cocksuckers told us they don't want us to say motherfucker. So on the count of 3, everybody say, it's like, it's like the end of Woodstock where they handed out candles to everybody and tell the Chili Peppers, tell people not to light fires. And what do? They cover Jimi Hendrix's fire. Right. I mean, that's what a musician, that's what an artist is going to do.
Absolutely.
But not only did you get some amazing like musical acts, I mean, some of the tattoo artists that you lined up, Scott. I mean, Philip Liu, Sean Vasquez, Bernie Luther, Paul Booth, right? Paul Booth's name was all over the place. He was all over Metal Hammer. He was all over Kerrang and Rip and all that stuff. Kind of does sound like, though, from the outside reading in, he was kind of more of a weight than anything. It sounds like he brought a lot of drama to the table that I know in I'm sure time has healed a bunch of wounds, but it seemed like at the time it was kind of difficult.
It was a pain in the ass is what it was. And having done startups and those types of things before, I knew how messy they were the first time out. I just knew the things you had to accept to get the thing done. And I knew all of the things that were wrong with the tour before we even left. And I knew all of the things that were going to go wrong. And there was nothing I could do about it. I just had to suck it up, get through the first tour, and fix it for the second.
Right.
That was the mindset that I've always had. He did not have that. He just couldn't wrap his head around it. And the other thing was, that tour was 98% music and 2% tattooing. As far as the way the goal was over years as we ran the tour was to even it up a little bit and let's push tattooing more to the forefront. This was a long-term plan. And he was just having a bad tour. He just felt like I wasn't representing the tattoo artist correctly. And he was just, just being a dick.
And your
we ended up doing a couple of shows together that was some of the best tattoo shows ever put on, he and I. But on that tour, he was just impossible.
I think at that time, though, because I remember my first couple tattoos, I got some Paul Booth stuff, not from him, but like stuff that he would put out and we would just copy. But like, I think back then is when he started to get like that big name.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
it got really big.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me that he would act that way. I think a lot of people, especially in a tattoo world, when they get an ego, man, they get a fucking ego.
Well, tattooing is a really interesting field for one of two reasons. One is they have no representation. They're artists who have the capability of making a good living, who have no managers or agents, and they're artistic people who are typically running businesses too.
Yeah.
So that sort of creates this problem, and then they've just got this chip on their shoulder. And tattooing, it's funny because they look at anybody, and I think it's still this way. Like when you walk into a tattoo shop, they're not warm places, and they look at someone, they're not welcoming, and they look at anybody who's not a tattoo artist as an outsider. I was considered an outsider, even though I'm sleeved and I'm putting on this show and all my blood into it. And if you think, what if the music business would be like if that was the case? If the bands held the fans in disdain? And so that's where it's a very strange culture. And Lyle Tuttle, who's the granddaddy of tattooing, told me this right up front, and I should have listened to him because he was right.
You said that in the book.
He said they're cocksuckers and copycats, and you'll never change that. And I'll show you. That one I was wrong about. I may have been like, I'll show you.
Yeah, my uncle's a tattoo artist, and I lived with him for like 10 years. I know I've been around that shit forever, man.
Oh, they're crazy.
But you're right, though. They're not friendly places to walk in. They kind of look at you like you're weird. Like, oh, is this guy going to ask for the flash on the wall? You know, and it's, and you're right, though. They're artists and they also run a business. So it's
it's a very, very weird. And what I write about in the book is after World War II, tattooing would have disappeared in the U.S. if it wasn't for like the bikers.
Mhm.
You know, they were the ones who kept it alive, and then it had its resurgence in the 60s with Lyle Tuttle in the 70s and to what it's become today. But in the 50s, tattooing was almost extinct,
Yeah, you were
you
you
know.
were you, you were a World War II vet, you were a merchant marine, or you
Yeah,
were in some sort of the armed forces, right?
yeah,
Basically, yeah.
yeah. Well, all the people who came back from World War II and didn't want to rejoin society, who said, "Screw it, we're going to live by our own." There were a whole bunch of them, just like in
Right.
Vietnam and Korea. It happens with any something like that. So, but they're a strange crew. They're a strange bunch.
So you talked about, okay, we're going to do it this year. And then as time goes on, we'll balance the scales. We'll do more and more and more. And then you get to 2001, and here comes Sharon Osbourne
Yeah,
again.
yeah,
So, Tim, and for those listeners who haven't read the book yet, Scott approaches Slipknot. They were in again. They said, "Oh, we had a blast. We're going to do it again." Marilyn Manson is in. And then here comes Sharon Osbourne with her bucket of money, and she's just doubling whatever you're offering. She's doubling it.
yeah.
And that just, I think you made the wise choice, because you could have just kept going and you would have bankrupted yourself, right? Right? Trying to the one up,
Yeah,
two
there
up,
was
one up,
no.
two
Yeah,
up.
we would have
Yeah.
game over. It's Clear Channel at the time. They own their multi-billion dollar company. They own thousands of radio stations.
Yep.
They own like 200,000 billboards. So, and they own most of the amphitheaters. So there was no way we could ever, we could ever compete. But it was really Slipknot's manager. He was the one who shook our hand, and then he did the same thing he did to Sharon. I mean, I couldn't be that surprised,
Right.
but
Right.
my partner felt he was solid, but he wasn't. And once that happened, then we were just dead in the water.
Um,
Um,
but after this, you ended up with a resurgence. You did a tattoo show in Massachusetts, right? Like you brought it back
yeah,
to Massachusetts.
we did the first tattoo convention in Massachusetts. It had been illegal in Massachusetts, and the law changed in 2001. So
Awesome.
we put on the first tattoo festival, and I did that with Paul Booth. And I say in the book, I don't know if he was on the wrong medication on the tour or switched to the right one when we were working on the convention, but he was heavy lifting. They all are. Any creative person is, you know. But we put on a good show. It was a good show. One of the best tattoo shows ever, I think, as far as the artists who came and all that. Yeah.
Wait,
So
so you're saying that you couldn't have a tattoo shop in Massachusetts until 2001?
You couldn't even do a demonstration. They wouldn't let us do a demonstration at Suffolk Downs. We couldn't tattoo. You couldn't do anything. All
Wow.
tattooing in Massachusetts basically was at tattoo parties. We
Oh,
were going to have
okay.
a whole section at the first convention that was just like, we can fix this, because the tattoos people were bringing in were just like, oh my Lord, So you'd get 10 people show up at some guy's house and he'd tattoo all of them.
Yep.
And
Been to
that was,
many
and
of
it was
them.
illegal in New York in 1997.
that
It
was
just
the
became
wild
legalized
part.
in New York.
That is,
Think
yeah,
about
Yeah.
that's
that, Tim.
fucking crazy to me.
Yeah. Right.
Because
Nowadays,
in
they're in every strip
Philly,
mall.
yeah, I mean, because in Philly, like I would be on South Street when I was 15, and there would be 20 tattoo shops.
Yeah, in New York, there was a hepatitis scare in the early 60s, and they banned it in a lot of cities. In New York and Boston and Massachusetts is
Gotcha.
one of them, and New York. And 97 is when Sean Vasquez, he opened up one of the first shops in New York when it became legal.
Okay.
Not that there wasn't a thriving tattoo scene. People were working in illegal shops and out of their houses, and a whole style, and a lot of great artists. Jonathan Shaw, I mean, amazing artists came out of that. But it technically wasn't illegal until 97 and 2001. Hard to believe, right? In Massachusetts,
Yeah.
2001.
That is really kind of, well. Then again, Massachusetts is the birthplace of Puritanism in the states. So I guess it kind of isn't too far of a reach. I guess.
It's a weird place. I mean, I live here. It's very liberal. I think Bill Burr put it best that he described Massachusetts and Boston as racist San Francisco. So I think that really encapsulates it.
He truly is a national treasure. Every time he's on TV,
Oh,
I
he
catch
is,
him
man.
because he's so funny. So Scott, let's talk about
Yeah,
why a book? Why now? So this is your second book, right?
it is.
Yeah. So your first
Yeah,
book was Get Out. Yeah.
Get Off.
Get Off. Get Off.
Get Off. And that was a book about growing up in New York in the 70s, being closeted. I became a heroin addict and very successful in the music business while all this is going on. I bought a nightclub in Manhattan, a jazz club, a famous one, on my 23rd birthday. and sort of blew it all with drugs, and that's what the first book was about, you know. And it's a 70s 80s sort of gritty
Hmm.
uh coming to terms with yourself book and drug addiction book. And I was going to follow it up. My plan was with the next segment of my life, which is also sort of gritty. I got clean and worked at an AIDS hospice in New York and went, you know, took a different path. And then the pandemic hit. And I was like, I got to write something funny. I got to write something lighter.
Right.
Like I need to write something that I'm over and that's fun and it's not going to be traumatic to have to write about and is light, even though people don't see it that way in a lot of, but I see it that way. And that's how it came out. And originally I was just going to do a like an oral history article
Hmm.
on the 20th anniversary of the tour. And I spoke to some of the musicians and the people who were part of it. And as I was doing that, I realized that, you know, I think I have a book here. And I also don't want to write the book that I was planning on. So I just wrote it. And I
Ah,
stopped interviewing people. I didn't interview any. And once I made that decision, I never spoke to another person or musician or anything. I just wrote the, you know, I didn't want
ah,
it to be a journalistic, like,
right.
I didn't want to wait a year to speak to Corey from Slipknot and be beholden to that. I just wanted to write my
Yeah.
book. So that's sort
Right.
of how it
Right.
happened.
And for those
And the
listening,
timing's really
yeah.
good. The timing's really good because like the nostalgia piece of it is just strong. And I'm old
Mhm.
enough that I've lived through several waves of nostalgia. I've lived through like 60s nostalgia and punk nostalgia and there's this metal nostalgia right now. And the bands, I could put the same lineup right now and sell out Giant Stadium. It'd be stronger, the package that
Oh,
I have than it
absolutely.
was
Absolutely. Oh
22
yeah.
years ago. Their Slipknot's tour, Knotfest, starts the day my tour start. My book comes out. That all these bands are on the road. Head PE, Sepultura, Seven Dust. It's just, you know, it's just
Hmm.
crazy that way.
And
It's so the timing of it was good, but it was completely by accident.
and looking, you know, like you said, like you look at that lineup now, right? Your second stage was Hatebreed, Amen, Mudvayne, Nothing Faced, Full Devil Jacket, Workhorse Movement, UPO, Spineshank, right? All those bands, you put half of those bands on a tour right now, and it would draw. Like
But I
the
don't
new
think
metal
many of the,
revival is huge.
yeah, no, it's absolutely huge. But I don't think a lot of the second stage bands, like the first stage bands were much more durable than the second stage, except for
Yes.
Nashville Pussy and Hatebreed. I don't know if the rest of them are still active bands.
No, I don't. 1 minute silence, I think, is still bouncing around. I think.
I'm not sure.
But you're right. Like Amen is done, and Mudvayne, you know, they just did that reunion show, but they've been
Right.
done, and
The
you know,
singer
Nothing
from Nothing
Face
Face
is
died.
past. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that is really wild. And for those that are listening to this that are debating picking up the book, I'm telling you right now, pick up the damn book. So not only does it have Scott's story, there are tons of photos of the shows, of all the events. There are tour breakdowns, itineraries, travel plans, lineups, set lists. All that stuff is in the back. So it's a really cool way to remember the show. And I mean, and I emailed you, Scott, the my story, which is how we got connected. Tim's heard this. Most of our fans have heard. You know, it was the first time I saw Hatebreed. I got punched in the face in slow motion. The guy's fist was as big as a cinder block. I lost my earrings. My glasses went flying. My buddy, little Bobby, Tim knows him. He had his wife beater ripped down to his belly button. He lost a shoe. He was like, "Yo, what the fuck just happened?" Like it was
Yeah.
nuts. And then you know, this is Mudvayne right before LD50 comes out, and you see these guys with makeup, and you're like, "What is this? Is this a Slipknot ripoff?" And then they start playing, and the musicianship is like, "Holy shit, these guys can really play."
Yeah.
And then you have the punk rock disaster that is Amen, and you had Nothing Face. You know, Matt Holt and the guitarist are just both amazing. So it was really wild. It was really wild to see. And then you have Metallica closing out the Giant Stadium show. Tim, there's an interesting story in the book where Scott says, I think it was you and your partner get on to talk about the band Systematic, and the
Yeah.
band's manager Lars gets on the phone. And was it your partner didn't realize who he
My
was?
partner didn't know who he
talking
was. And he was trying to
Oh,
get Systematic on. And my partner's like, listen, Lars, we're full. I don't have any other spots. And Lars is like, and this is pre-texting. I had no way to get in touch with him. He's like, listen, Lars, are you going to be at the New York show? And Lars is like, yeah. Well, come by and say hello. Maybe we can do something for your band next year. So we get off the phone and my partner's like obviously aghast, but I'm like, I don't know. I think he just thought you were the biggest badass in the world. You don't give a shit who he is. You're not letting his band on the thing. We obviously let them on. But yeah, he had no idea who he was.
That is
And I'm like,
totally.
here he is. He's just, yeah, crazy.
Yeah,
shit.
he's just yelling
Does
at him
he
like
still
he's-
get his balls broke to this day for that?
Oh yeah, I hope so.
That's amazing.
hope
We
so.
should get him on. Just be like, what the hell were you thinking?
Had no idea. As soon as he said Lars, I'm like, oh no, here we go.
Well, at least this
Here
was
we
before Some Kind of Monster, because if it was after Some Kind of Monster, some of the shine definitely wore off that Metallica Apple watching that. And it was like, oh man, but I mean, I will give them credit. I stuck around through, I think I left right before they played the encore. And for a bunch of older guys, right? Considering all the other young bands that were on the stage, I mean, Slipknot is literally half their age.
Yeah.
They still put on a hell of a show. They put on a hell of a show.
Yeah.
Awesome stuff. So,
Well, when I saw them in Germany, I mean, that's the first time I'd seen them at a festival there from the side of the stage in front of 50,000 people. And I mean, they were just amazing, man.
Yeah.
Just the connection,
Ultimate.
the authenticity, their musicianship. I remember standing there with a fairly well-known musician who was looking at Lars and going, he's not a very good drummer. And I'm like, who gives a shit? There's 50,000 people coming in their pants. Who cares what he's fucking doing? The alchemy of it, just like whatever it was, it worked and it was pretty magical from what I saw.
Awesome.
But they didn't let me on the stage at my own show. They wouldn't let me on the stage.
Yeah, you said that they didn't let anybody on the sides.
Nobody on the sides, nothing. I didn't put in the book what was really weird is I went on the main stage when Slipknot was playing or Seven Dust, and I saw Jason Newsted. And I didn't touch him. I just sort of walked up to him and I was going to just say, hi, I'm the producer. And as soon as I was just going to say hi, he completely flipped out and two bodyguards came over and got in between us. And I'm like, whoa, man, that guy needs to, and he
chill
left
out
the band shortly thereafter. So
Yeah.
whatever was happening with him, I was like, wow, that's a guy who's on edge. Cause I didn't come over like a fan. I was just like, hey, thanks for doing the show. And he was like, hey.
That is totally wild. And when I was in South Jersey at the time, I drove up with a bunch of friends, and one of the guys we took is the nicest Christian gentleman you have ever met in your life. Didn't drink until he was 21, and he was a frat guy in college, so he took his lumps, and he saw Fish on New Year's Eve, and he said he would go with us. And we got home and we're like, Ed, what did you think? And he literally was speechless for like 3 days. He's like, I got to compose my thoughts. Don't ask. I got to compose my thoughts. And then on the fourth day, he said, that was not what I expected. I don't think I have ever seen anything like that. I don't think I will ever see anything like that again. And he goes, and I wouldn't take it back for a million years. And I was like, that makes it worthwhile, right?
Absolutely.
Like that makes it totally worthwhile. So,
Yeah.
so Scott, we want to be conscious of your time.
Sure.
So if people want to find the band, they want to reach out and learn more. Where do they go?
Caravanofpain.com.
Okay.
And also if you look Caravan of Pain on Instagram, I have a whole archive and of pictures and video that's been sitting in my basement for 20 years. It's almost like the new metal version of like the Get Back tapes. So I have an archive of hundreds of slides that I'm going to be putting on Instagram and and the Facebook and Twitter, and we have Caravan of Pain, and it goes on sale the 15th.
Awesome.
And there's going to be an audiobook too. There's an audiobook, a hardcover, paperback, Kindle, and for enough money, I'll come to your house and read it to you. If I don't have to fly too far.
Any thoughts about doing like a documentary movie? Because I know you got a lot of video footage. Would that be like, is that where you run into like rights and who owns the rights to the songs? Like, would that make it difficult?
Yeah, I don't know if the footage that we have, the concert footage is lost. It ended up in some lawyer's vault, and I don't know where it is.
That's a shame.
Which is a shame because I had a videographer on tour, so we didn't shoot whole shows, but we shot a lot of footage. So that's just kind of a bummer, is we don't have a lot left. But I have all the slides and stuff.
And they're awesome to look at.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about, like, say 10 years ago, like maybe we could do this again, and then you're like, nah, I think I'm just high.
It's funny. I have people periodically come to me to want to do something with it, and I know that they have no chance whatsoever because they're either not in the music business or they're not in the tattoo industry so it would have to be the right person to come along who could just make it happen. I'm not going on a vision quest again.
Yeah.
And I'm also not going on the road again. I'm just too old. I'm done with it. It's the same thing. There's just certain things I'm not willing to do anymore
Yeah. I don't
that I
blame
was
you.
willing to do 20 years ago. I got a kid. So, but I wouldn't be surprised if one day down the road it reared its head again. It wouldn't
So
surprise me.
I forgot to ask you, Scott, what's next? Right after the book comes out, what's next for you?
Me, I'm going to write another book. That's what I'm going to do. I have a plan to publish a book every 2 or 3 years until I die.
Nice.
Cool. Awesome.
Which is a pretty bold statement, except you've read the book and you know my lifestyle. It'd be a miracle if I got through this interview, frankly. So it's not that big a boast, you know.
Yeah,
But yeah, I have a book. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that second book that I put off.
The hospice.
I'm
Okay.
going to work on that one. And then I just want to write, raise my kid and write. And I still love going to shows. And like I told you, I have an idea for a new show. It's called Armageddon on Ice, and it's just a really fucked up ice capades for metalheads. So it's got the mutant hockey league, like zombies playing hockey and zombie figure skating, human ice curling, where we ball people up and push them down the ice with a live metal band. I know that if I had this idea 20 years ago, I could have made that happen.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not willing to do what it takes right now, and no one sees your vision the way that you do.
Right.
Yeah.
You need to be the one to. So.
Right.
Anyway, so I still think about the shows.
There's a final story you tell in the book, and I think we can end on this because it's your life coming full circle, where you were out in the left coast, kind of fell off the wagon. You decide to drive cross country, and you're coming back east, and you stop. I think it's in Iowa, is it, or Cleveland? And Iowa. You get to the hotel, and you turn on the TV, and the first thing you see is the local news story saying that after 20 years or whatever, now we're having the first band at this venue, the last band being Tattoo the Earth, when they basically banned them and couldn't come back. And you just turned the TV off and said, yep, I've come full circle. That is like the perfect way to wrap that whole thing up.
Yeah. It was like 2 years after.
Awesome.
They had banned Slipknot at their hometown show in Des Moines. And what are the odds that I'm driving cross country and turn on the TV and there's a local news story? The minute I turn on the TV, good news for music fans. The ban on music. They didn't just ban Slipknot. They banned all music at this park for a couple of years. Yeah, exactly. We footloosed them. That was the place where the guy said, "Can you do something about the language?" I'm like, "Really? That's your problem with this?" You know?
Well, I know we talked a little bit at the beginning, and this can be the last thing we talk about. But you said once, like, your wife left the tour, like, you started getting in trouble. What, were you just like partying a lot, or I mean, you don't have to talk about it if you don't want to.
No, I'll talk about it. I was I referenced it earlier. I gave up heroin in like 1987 and stayed completely clean for 10 years, and then started smoking pot again. Right when the book starts is right about the time that I started smoking. And, I just drank too much and I did a little coke. I was doing more than I should have been as an addict and someone who had health issues, but didn't push it. And then I went out west. My wife and I split up for a little while because she just didn't want to do Tattoo the Earth anymore.
Yeah.
And once I saw the show was failing and it wasn't making money, I did crystal meth for the first time at 41 years old, man. For 10 days straight.
Holy shit.
No, I had no idea. And I was doing heroin. I mean, I'm not a lightweight in that way, but I just lost my marbles. And that's when I was driving cross country. I was methed out. It felt like needles when I was peeing. I think my wife was going to take me home. I was broke. I was just terrible. And I sit down and turn on the TV, and fortunately she took me back and we're still together. So that's the good news. Good. And I'm as sober as I get. I'm one of those people that I just smoke copious amounts of pot. I haven't done hard drugs in years. It works you know what I mean? It works for me.
Works for you.
I'm an old man. It's my happy medium. I've been able to do it now for 20 years with flare-ups, I call it. It's like a chronic illness that has flare-ups. And I manage the flare-ups and try not to get down on myself during them.
Right.
And they become shorter in duration as I get older. And that's the But I fucked up. I underestimated my addiction, and it got me in the ass. I went a couple of years where I kind of kept it together, and like anything with addiction, it's when the shit gets bad and you don't have any foundation to be able to. And that's where I just went off the rails, man. I was just like, just Wisconsin death trip. And I came back from it, and a lot of those guys on the tour, Joey, Paul, Scott Weiland, Jeff Hanneman, all died from the lifestyle. So I'm really fortunate to be here and to have written the book and to be talking to you guys tonight.
Yeah, it's funny how the world.
You're here, man.
Yeah, we are definitely stoked. So once again, we want to thank Scott for coming on. This has been so cool to have this conversation. On behalf of Scott, Tim, myself, we want to thank all of you for tuning in. All the socials, Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and whatnot. This episode actually comes out on March 9th, so right before the book is coming out. So please go to caravanofpain.com. We will have a link in the show notes. We have a link in the description. Pick up the book, check it out. Watch all the video you can. There's tons of footage. Scott's got tons of stuff he's been putting up on Instagram. There's tons of stuff on Facebook. So
and don't forget Tinder and Grindr. I'll be on Tinder and Grindr, flogging the book.
Awesome.
As long as you're flogging the book and not something else.
Flogging something, right?
Yeah. All right. So on behalf of all of us, we want to thank Scott. And until next time, it's a New Breed saying cheers.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
You too.